It's been almost 4 months since our last video, and we've finally got a lab space which we're really excited about. Now once we've tidied this place up, we'll give you a proper tour, but for now we're just excited to get building our aircraft.
Over the past week or so, we've been trying to perfect the kind of fiberglass processing layer procedure, trying to get to grips with all of the other bits of the manufacturing process as well. We've got some pretty interesting kind of videos and clips to show you. So I'll let Max take over and kind of explain what we've been up to in the past week.
So the first thing we needed to do was make a mould to lay the fiberglass in. Our original plan for these was to route them out of pattern foam, but that ended up being way too expensive, in the hundreds of pounds per block. So we moved to MDF, which was significantly cheaper. The router was quite an old and clumsy machine, and we had more than a few teething issues trying to figure it out. On top of that, the router needs constant supervision with an extractor. We need to make quite big moulds, and we can't supervise it for days at a time, so it just didn't end up being what we chose. Instead, we decided to try 3D printing our moulds, as Dan and I both own 3D printers we could put to work. We chose a test piece from the nose of our design, slightly scaled down, and set it going on Dan's trusty Ender 3. They ended up coming out really well with little warping. There was some under extrusion, but they joined together, and that was what was most important. The next step was to prime them with some polyfiller prime and seal to seal up the gaps. We don't have any video of that part since the polyfiller was my job, and looking back there was definitely a few things I could have done better, but the whole point of these tests was to learn the lessons and do it better next time. So with the mould prime, we then needed to apply 5 coats of release wax. We did it for the tops of the moulds, but not the sides, and yeah, that would turn out to be a bit of a mistake. After we'd finished with the release wax, it was time to cut our sheets of fiberglass and then mix our epoxy, and then start applying alternate layers of the resin and of our fiberglass weave. So we had 5 plies in total. With the top and bottom layers, they were a bit of a lighter weave than the rest, the middle ones were thicker. And yeah, looking back, our first layer was probably too dry. More resin would have helped fill the gaps slightly better, and our application technique started off a little rocky. But yeah, Josh ended up improving really quickly, and our last few plies ended up looking really good. So while this had been going on as well, we'd been cutting out the bag and the other layers to go on top of the mould while we pull a vacuum on it. And the first of those is a peel ply. This is basically just a porous barrier between the epoxy and the rest of what we put on top, with the idea that it protects it from the epoxy and should just peel away. Also really important is the breather cloth. This is just a thick layer that's also breathable, and basically it's so thick that it prevents the bag from tightening too much and blocking off the path of the vacuum pump, which would leave air bubbles. Then we made a hole in the bag and attached our valve to it, and with all that set up it was ready to turn on the vacuum pump. So after letting it pull a vacuum, we turned off the pump and it seemed like it was holding pretty well. So we decided to leave it and come back after lunch to see if the vacuum had leaked at all. It turned out while we were gone the bag had lost almost all of its vacuum. The valve, it turned out, was broken, so we tried to seal it with some more tacky tape, but that didn't work. Underneath, the sharp edges of our mould had pierced through the bag as well. We tried to seal that with tacky tape, but the vacuum still ended up bleeding away. We spoke to the technicians at Bath about it, and in the end they just let us borrow one of their thicker bags and borrow their valve. And after a while that seemed to hold a really good seal, but at this point the only thing left to do was to leave it overnight. When we came back in the morning, the vacuum was perfect, exactly the same as how we'd left it, which we were really happy to see. So the only thing left to do was take it out of the bag and start peeling it away from the mould. And yeah, I mentioned earlier that we didn't put release wax on the sides. That ended up making things pretty difficult. On 2 of the sides we had to Dremel it off. Eventually we got it free from the mould, and the next thing to do was to cut the part free from the whole sort of layup piece with the Dremel. Josh makes this look really easy. He made a really good clean cut, but trust me when I say it was really quite difficult. Finally, George just gave the edges of the part a little sand, and all in all we were really happy with how this part came out. We might have some struggles 3D printing some of the larger moulds, but we learnt quite a few lessons, and all in all we considered the process a real success. We're experimenting a little with our video format at the moment, and let us know if this kind of video is something you'd like to see more of. Until then, see you next time, guys.